Sevson, True November Horror Stories. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm your host, and tonight we're diving into 7 terrifying stories that all took place during the month of November. Now, November is that weird month, isn't it? Summer's gone, winter's creeping in, and there's this eerie feeling in the air. The days get shorter, the nights get colder, and for some reason, people keep telling me that November brings out something different. The stories you're about to hear are all accounts from real people who experienced something they couldn't explain. Some of them still don't know what happened to them. Others wish they could forget. So lock your doors, turn off the lights, and let's get started. Story 1. The Hitchhiker on Route 9. This story comes from a guy named Marcus who was driving through rural Pennsylvania in early November. It was about 2003, and he was heading back from his sister's house after Thanksgiving. The drive was supposed to take about 4 hours, pretty straightforward, but Marcus said he'd never forget that night. It was around 11 p.m. when Marcus hit this stretch of Route 9 that goes through the woods. No other cars, just him, his headlights, and trees on both sides of the road that seemed to go on forever. He said the radio kept cutting out, which was weird because he usually had great signal out there. Static, then a song, then static again. Marcus wasn't paying too much attention when he saw her. A woman standing on the side of the road with her thumb out, just standing there in the dark. No jacket, no bag, nothing. Just a woman in a blue dress. Now, Marcus said he wasn't the type to pick up hitchhikers. He'd always been told it was dangerous, and honestly, it was late and he was tired. But something about this woman, he felt like he had to stop. He describes it as this pull, like he wasn't really making the decision himself. He pulled over about 20 feet ahead of her and waited. In his rearview mirror, he watched her walk toward his car. She walked slowly, too slowly, like her legs weren't working right. When she opened the passenger door, he got his first real look at her face. Marcus said she was pale. Not just pale like she hadn't seen the sun, but pale like she'd been dead for a while. Her eyes were sunken in, and when she sat down, he could feel how cold it was coming off her. The temperature in the car dropped immediately. He could see his own breath. "Thank you for stopping," she said. But her voice sounded hollow, distant, like it was coming from somewhere far away, even though she was sitting right next to him. Marcus tried to act normal. He asked her where she was headed. She turned and looked at him with those empty eyes and said, "I'm going home." He asked her where home was, and she gave him an address about 30 miles north. Marcus figured, okay, 30 miles wasn't too bad. He'd drop her off and be on his way. He started driving. For the first few minutes they didn't talk, just silence. But Marcus said the air in the car felt heavy, like there was something pressing down on him. He kept glancing at her, and every time he did, she was staring straight ahead at the road. Then she spoke again without looking at him. "You passed it." "Past what?" Marcus asked. "The place where I died." Marcus's hands went numb on the steering wheel. He didn't know what to say. He glanced at her, but she was still staring straight ahead. I don't understand," he said. "About 5 miles back. That's where my car went off the road. November 14th, 1987. I've been trying to get home ever since." Marcus felt something ice cold run through his chest. He immediately started looking for a place to turn around or pull over. His instinct was to get away from this woman as fast as possible. But when he looked in the rearview mirror, she was gone. He slammed on the brakes and turned to look at the passenger seat. Empty. The door was still locked. She had just vanished. Marcus said he drove that whole stretch of road 3 more times that night looking for any sign of what happened. Finally, back at a gas station, he got on the internet and searched for accidents on Route 9 in Pennsylvania in 1987, and he found it. A woman named Catherine Mills had driven off the road on November 14th, 1987. Her body was never found. The car went into a ravine during a storm, and they never recovered it. She disappeared on the exact date and in the exact location the woman in his car had told him. Marcus said he never drove that route again, and every November on the 14th, he makes sure he's home before dark. Story 2. The Thing in the Chimney. Our second story takes us to a house in suburban Ohio, and this one happened to a family named the Hendersons during November of 2015. Tom Henderson was a normal guy, normal family, normal house. A Cape Cod-style home that they'd owned for about 8 years. It was the kind of place you drive past 1,000 times and never think twice about. But that November something changed. It started with scratching sounds coming from the walls. Tom thought maybe it was squirrels. He called an exterminator, who came out, looked around, found nothing, and charged him $300. The scratching continued. Then came the sounds from the chimney. His wife, Susan, first noticed it while she was making coffee one morning. This rhythmic thumping, like something heavy was being dragged down the inside of the chimney. Tom went up to the attic and shined his flashlight up into the chimney flue. He saw nothing. But the sounds got worse. By the middle of November, their 9-year-old daughter, Emma, was refusing to sleep in her room because it was the room closest to the chimney. She said she could hear something moving around in there at night. Tom tried to rationalize it. Old pipes make noise. Houses settle. But his daughter wasn't buying it. And honestly, neither was he. One evening, Tom decided to try and look down the chimney from the top. He got a ladder, climbed up onto the roof, and shined his flashlight down. What he saw made his blood run cold. There was something in there. Not an animal, not a bird. Something. Humanoid. A shape, pale and thin, wedged inside the chimney shaft. It was facing downward, and as Tom's light hit it, the shape didn't move. But Tom swears he felt it register his presence. He felt seen. Tom scrambled down from the roof, called the fire department, and told them there was possibly a person stuck in his chimney. They came out within 20 minutes, brought equipment, and went to investigate. But when they looked, there was nothing there. The chimney was completely empty. The firefighters checked the entire chimney system, looked for any signs of someone being in there, and found absolutely nothing. They told Tom it was probably just shadows playing tricks on him, that the flashlight beam can create strange shapes. Tom didn't believe them. That night the scratching got worse. It was louder now, more frantic. It sounded like whatever was in there was trying to get out. Susan wanted to leave, to stay at a hotel, but Tom felt stupid calling in more people only to have them find nothing again. Around 2 a.m., the sound stopped. Complete silence. Tom lay in bed, listening to the quiet, and he said it felt worse than the noise had. Silence meant something had changed. The next morning, they found soot on the living room floor. A lot of it. It looked like something had come out of the fireplace and then, walked around the room? But nobody saw anything. There were no footprints, no handprints, just soot scattered across their carpet like an invisible thing had materialized and then walked away. When they called a chimney inspection company out, the inspector found something strange. There were scratch marks on the inside walls of the chimney, marks that looked human, like fingernails dragging down the brick. Fresh marks. The inspector said he'd never seen anything like it. Tom and his family eventually moved out. He sold the house for well below market value, telling the realtor there was a structural issue he wasn't willing to deal with. He never told anyone what really happened, except for his sister, who shared the story with someone online. But here's the thing that keeps people awake about this story. A year after they moved out, another family moved in. and according to online forums, they reported the exact same sounds within 3 weeks. Scratching in the walls, thumping in the chimney, the sounds of something trying to get out. Whatever is in that house, it's still there. Story 3. The November Cold. This story comes from a woman named Rachel, and it's honestly one of the strangest accounts of something unexplainable I've ever heard. Rachel worked as a nurse at a hospital in upstate New York. She'd been working there for 12 years, and she knew that hospital like the back of her hand. She worked the night shift, which meant she'd spent her evenings dealing with emergency room cases, post-op patients, the usual rhythm of a busy hospital at night. In November of 2011, Rachel was assigned to the third-floor recovery ward. It was a relatively slow night, which was nice. The patients were stable, everything was running smoothly, and she was just doing her rounds, checking vitals, making sure people were comfortable. Around 3 a.m., she was walking through the hallway to check on a patient in room 312. And that's when she felt it, the cold. Rachel said it was like walking through an invisible wall of freezing air. 1 second she was fine, warm in the normal hospital temperature, and the next she was in what felt like a walk-in freezer. Her breath immediately became visible. She could see it coming out of her mouth. But that was impossible. Hospital hallways don't have that kind of temperature fluctuation. She kept walking, her curiosity getting the better of her. The cold got worse. By the time she reached room 312, she was shivering, and she could barely feel her fingers. She checked the thermostat on the wall. It said the temperature was 72 degrees, but it felt like 20 degrees at most. Rachel went into the patient's room. A man named Gerald who'd had knee surgery earlier that day. He was awake, sitting up in bed, and he looked terrified. "Are you cold?" Rachel asked him. Gerald nodded frantically. "It's so cold. I don't know what's wrong. The blankets aren't helping. I'm freezing." Rachel checked the room. The window was closed. The AC wasn't on. The thermostat on the wall said 72 degrees, but the room was absolutely frigid. She could see Gerald's breath in the air, and the monitors he was hooked up to were starting to show a slight irregularity in his heart rate, elevated probably from stress and the cold. Rachel ran to get extra blankets, a heated blanket, and she radioed for her supervisor. When her supervisor, a woman named Helen, came up, she took 1 step into room 312 and immediately said, "What is going on in here? It's freezing." Helen grabbed the room phone and called maintenance. "We've got a major AC malfunction in room 312. Get someone up here now." Maintenance came within 10 minutes and they found absolutely nothing wrong. The AC was off and hadn't been on. The heating system was functioning normally. There was no reason for the room to be that cold, and yet it was. The maintenance guy actually put a thermometer in the room and it read 68 degrees, almost normal. But you could see your breath. The cold was undeniable. Over the next 3 hours, the temperature in that room fluctuated wildly. One moment it would be freezing. The next it would feel normal. Gerald's vitals started becoming unstable. His heart rate elevated, his blood pressure climbed. The doctors decided to move him to a different room for his own safety. The second they rolled his bed out of room 312, the temperature in the room returned to normal. Helen checked the thermostat. 72 degrees. They opened the door to the hallway and there was no cold spot, no unusual temperature anywhere. Rachel helped get Gerald settled into a new room, and his vitals stabilized immediately. He fell asleep within the hour, and everything went back to normal for the rest of the night. But here's where it gets really strange. The next morning, Rachel asked to see the records for room 312. Specifically, she wanted to know who had been in that room before Gerald. The hospital staff told her they didn't have that information readily available, so she tried accessing the computer system herself, but room 312's records were incomplete. There were dates missing, November dates. She requested the records manually from the archives. When they came, she found something that made her skin crawl. In November of 1998, a patient named David Chen had been in room 312. According to the notes, he'd been brought into the ER with severe hypothermia. His body temperature had dropped to 88 degrees. Despite being inside a heated hospital in a normal room, his body wouldn't warm up. The doctors did everything they could, but David Chen died in room 312 from hypothermia in November of 1998. 13 years later, Gerald came in with a surgical complication. His surgeon had requested room 312 specifically because it was an open room, and Gerald needed the bed. And as soon as Gerald arrived, the cold started. Rachel doesn't work at that hospital anymore. She transferred to a facility about 50 miles away. But she said before she left, she requested that room 312 be shut down indefinitely. Officially, she told the administration there was something wrong with the HVAC system that couldn't be easily fixed. The room remains closed to this day, and on November nights, nurses who work the third floor report hearing whispers coming from behind that sealed door. Whispers of someone calling for help, someone asking why it's so cold, whatever is in that house. It's still there. Story 4. The Passenger Seat. This story comes from an Uber driver in Seattle named David. And it's one of those stories that you wouldn't believe if it came from anyone else. But David's reputation is solid. He's been driving for Uber for 6 years, thousands of rides, consistently 5-star ratings. In early November, David picked up a passenger at a downtown Seattle hotel. The passenger was a young man, maybe mid-20s, in a business suit. Nothing out of the ordinary. He requested to go to an address about 20 minutes outside the city, and David accepted. The ride was quiet. The passenger sat in the back seat and didn't say much. David tried making small talk, asking how his day was, but the passenger gave one-word answers. David figured he was just tired and let him be. About halfway through the drive, David noticed something weird in his rearview mirror. The passenger was very still, like unusually still, not just sitting quietly, but completely motionless. David found himself glancing back frequently because it was starting to feel strange. "You doing okay back there?" David asked. The passenger didn't respond. David turned to look, and the passenger's face was wrong. His expression hadn't changed at all. His eyes were fixed forward, not blinking. His mouth was set in this weird, unnatural line. "Hey, you all right?" David asked again, louder this time. "Nothing." David said he felt a chill run down his spine. He told the passenger that he was going to pull over because he was concerned about his health. The passenger didn't respond to that either. David pulled into a parking lot and got out of the car. He opened the back door and immediately recoiled. There was a smell. Not a human smell. Something chemical, like formaldehyde mixed with something else he couldn't identify. The passenger still wasn't moving. David called 911 and told them he had a medical emergency. An ambulance arrived within minutes, but when the paramedics checked the passenger, they found his pulse and vital signs were completely normal. Everything about his physical health checked out, but the guy still wasn't responding to anything. He wasn't communicative. He wasn't moving. The paramedics ended up taking him to a hospital for evaluation. David gave the Seattle Police Department a full report, and they opened an investigation, but they couldn't find anything criminal. The passenger wasn't able to explain what had happened to him either. When he became responsive later at the hospital, he claimed he didn't remember getting into the car or the drive. He said the last thing he remembered was walking down the street outside his hotel. But here's the thing that really freaked David out. When he looked at the passenger's location data from the Uber app, it showed the passenger had requested the ride from the hotel 15 minutes before David actually picked him up. The timestamp didn't match. The location was correct, but the timestamp showed the request had come in when David was still in his apartment, getting ready for work. And there's more. David checked his car that night and the back seat was cold. Ice cold. Not like the air conditioning had been running. Cold like something had been sitting back there that had absorbed all the heat from that area. A week later, David got a message through the Uber app. A 1-star review from the passenger. The message said, "Wrong address. But thanks for the ride. I made it home." But David had never been to the address the passenger requested. He'd pulled over in the parking lot after the passenger went unresponsive. The ride was never completed, and when David checked the app, the ride history for that passenger had been deleted. No record of the ride at all. David said he stopped driving Uber after that. He couldn't shake the feeling that he'd picked up something that wasn't actually human, something wearing a human shape, but missing all the things that make a person real. Story 5, The Voice on the Phone. Our 5th story comes from a woman named Jennifer, and it's about the eerie coincidence of a phone call she received on a November evening in 2009. Jennifer was a high school teacher living alone in Portland, Oregon. She had a close relationship with her parents, especially her dad. They talked on the phone at least once a week, usually on Sundays. But this particular Sunday, her dad had called on Monday instead because he'd been busy the day before. They'd talked for about 30 minutes, just catching up about life, what was happening at school, what her parents had been doing. Normal, everyday conversation. When they hung up, Jennifer felt that warm feeling you get after talking to someone you love. The next morning, Tuesday, Jennifer got a call from her mom. She was crying and very upset. Her dad had been in a car accident. He'd been driving home from work on Monday evening, about 3 hours after his phone call with Jennifer, and a semi-truck had cut him off. He'd swerved to avoid it, hit another car, and crashed. He was in the hospital. His condition was critical. Jennifer was devastated. She drove to the hospital immediately. Her dad had suffered a serious head injury and he was in a coma. The doctors didn't know if he'd recover. For 2 days, Jennifer sat by her dad's bedside holding his hand, praying he'd wake up. On Wednesday evening, she decided to go home for a few hours to shower and change clothes. Her mom would stay at the hospital. When Jennifer got home, she felt emotionally exhausted. She made some tea and sat on her couch. She needed to hear her dad's voice, to hear him saying something that would give her hope. She knew he was in a coma and couldn't talk to her, but she just needed to remember what his voice sounded like. Jennifer decided to call her own voicemail. She'd saved several messages from her dad over the years, including one where he was just being silly and making jokes. She called her voicemail number and started going through the saved messages to find one from him. That's when she heard it, a new voicemail. The timestamp said it had come in on Monday at 8:47 p.m., but Jennifer had talked to her dad at 7 p.m. on Monday. This voicemail was from after the accident. She played it. It was her dad. His voice was exactly the same as always, calm and steady. He said, "Hey Jen, it's Dad. I just wanted to call and tell you that I love you very much. I know I might be going away for a while, but I want you to know that I'll always be thinking about you.
Take care of yourself.
I'm so proud of the person you've become. I love you." Jennifer said her heart completely stopped. This message couldn't have come from her dad. He was in a coma in the hospital. He couldn't have called her. But there it was. A voicemail from him at 8:47 p.m. on Monday, 15 minutes after his accident. She called the hospital immediately and asked her mom how her dad was doing. Her mom said there was no change, he was still unconscious. Jennifer told her about the voicemail and asked if the hospital had called her, if maybe it was some kind of message the hospital staff had recorded. Her mom said no, nothing like that. Jennifer went back to the hospital and told the staff about the voicemail. They were baffled. They checked the phone records and confirmed that a call had come to Jennifer's number from her dad's cell phone at 8:47 p.m. on Monday. But her dad's phone had been found in his car, and it was damaged in the crash. The phone hadn't been capable of making calls since the accident. Her dad eventually woke up from his coma and he recovered. But he had no memory of calling his daughter that night. In fact, he had no memory of the accident or the hours leading up to it. When Jennifer asked him if he could have possibly called her while he was being pulled from the wreckage, he said he didn't even remember the wreck happening. Jennifer kept that voicemail. She still has it saved, and she's played it hundreds of times over the years, because the voice is definitely her dad, but the call came from a place and time that don't make sense. To this day, she doesn't have an explanation for it, but she's convinced that whatever it was her dad saying goodbye to her. The doctors said he was lucky to survive the accident, but Jennifer sometimes wonders if the accident was supposed to kill him, and something somehow allowed him to leave one last message for her before it happened. Story 6. The Neighborhood Walks. This story comes from a subreddit post that was made in November of 2016, but the events happened several years before that. A woman named Claire had been experiencing something for years, something she didn't tell anyone about until she posted anonymously online. Claire lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood in New Jersey. She'd lived in the same house for 15 years and knew all her neighbors. It was the kind of place where everyone kept to themselves, but people were friendly enough when they saw each other at the mailbox or in the yard. In November of 2013, Claire started noticing that she would lose time at night. It started small. She'd go to bed and the next morning she'd feel exhausted, like she hadn't slept well. There would be dirt under her fingernails or her shoes would be wet even though she hadn't been outside. She figured she was sleepwalking. She mentioned it to her doctor, who suggested she could have a sleep disorder. He recommended she keep a sleep diary. Claire started documenting when she went to bed, how she felt and what she noticed in the morning. After about 2 weeks of keeping the diary, she noticed a pattern. On nights when she lost time, when she felt exhausted and had physical evidence of being outside, there was always dirt in specific locations. Always under her fingernails, always traces of mud on her sheets, always her shoes wet on one side like she'd been stepping over something. One night, Claire decided she was going to stay awake and see what happened. She got into bed and forced herself to keep her eyes open. She lay there for what felt like hours, just waiting. Around 3 a.m., she started to feel something. Not a sensation like waking up, but more like she was becoming aware of something that had already been happening, like consciousness was just dawning on her. And then she realized she was standing outside. She was standing in the middle of the street on her block, barefoot, wearing just her nightgown. It was cold and raining. Her heart started pounding because she had no memory of leaving her bed. Claire ran back to her house. She was soaking wet and freezing. She locked all her doors, turned on all the lights, and sat in her living room for the rest of the night, shaking. The next morning, she called her best friend Sally and told her what had happened. Sally thought she was joking, but when Claire insisted she was serious, Sally came over to talk to her about it. They were sitting in Claire's kitchen when Sally asked, "Okay, so you walked outside in the middle of the night. But where were you when you woke up?" Claire said she was in the middle of the street. Sally's face went pale. She asked Claire which street, and when Claire told her, Sally looked really uncomfortable. She said, "Claire, that's weird. My daughter has been having nightmares about that street. She keeps saying there's something at that intersection, something she can see but can't explain." Sally's daughter was 8 years old. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. She was terrified of what might happen if she closed her eyes. She stayed awake as long as she could, drinking coffee and tea, watching videos, anything to keep herself alert. But around 4 a.m., exhaustion won out. She fell asleep and she woke up standing in Sally's backyard, in the rain, with dirt under her fingernails. Claire's mind was racing. How had she gotten there? What was she doing? She walked around to Sally's front door and rang the bell. Sally answered, confused, and Claire told her what had happened. That's when Sally told her something that made Claire's blood run cold. While Claire had been in her backyard, Sally's daughter had woken up screaming. She'd had a nightmare about something touching her face while she slept. Claire moved out of that house within a month. She told her realtor she was having personal issues and needed to relocate. She didn't tell anyone about the sleepwalking, about the lost time, about the weird occurrences. But here's what she posted online years later. She said that after she moved, she was fine. No more lost time. No more waking up in strange places. But she also found out something that haunted her. She did research on that intersection where she'd woken up that first night. 15 years before she moved to the neighborhood, a child had gone missing from that intersection. 7-year-old David Martinez had been playing outside after dinner and he'd simply disappeared. They never found his body. The case went cold, and Claire couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been making her walk at night, whatever had been pulling her to that specific location, had been connected to what happened to that child. She wondered what it was trying to show her, and more terrifyingly, she wondered what it had been trying to do when it came into Sally's house. She never went back to that neighborhood, and she's never experienced lost time or sleepwalking since she left. Story 7, The Repeat Day. Our final story for tonight is one that happened in November 2019, and it comes from a man named Derek who still can't explain what happened to him. Derek was a logistics coordinator for a shipping company. He worked in a warehouse managing inventory and coordinating shipments. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills. He'd been working the same job for 8 years and had developed a routine. He knew his job inside and out. In mid-November, Derek woke up on a Tuesday morning like any other. He showered, got dressed, ate breakfast, and drove to work. His commute took about 25 minutes. He arrived at the warehouse at 7:45 a.m., clocked in, and went to his desk. The day was normal. He processed shipments, reviewed inventory lists, had a lunch break at noon where he went to the same deli he always went to, and ordered the same sandwich. At 5 p.m., he clocked out and drove home. He made dinner, watched some TV, and went to bed around 11 p.m. The next morning, or so he thought, Derek woke up on a Tuesday. Not Wednesday, Tuesday. He was confused at first. He thought maybe he'd overslept and it was actually still Tuesday. But no, he definitely slept through the night. He checked his phone. Damn Tuesday. Derek thought it was a glitch with his phone, so he turned it off and back on. Same day, same date. He turned on the TV. The news said it was Tuesday. Derek was starting to feel panicked, but he figured maybe he was just confused. Maybe he'd had a weird dream where he thought he'd lived through the whole day. He got ready and went to work, and the day repeated exactly the same way. He arrived at 7:45 a.m. His supervisor, Jeff, asked him the exact same question he'd asked yesterday about an order that had come in from a major client. Derek knew the answer, so he responded. The coworker who usually talks about his golf game for 10 minutes came by and told the exact same story about his round the day before. Everything was identical. Derek tried to change things. At lunch, instead of going to the deli, he drove to a different restaurant. A woman at the counter got confused and told him they'd just served him a sandwich an hour ago. But Derek had never been to that restaurant. He'd never ordered anything from them. The woman insisted he was lying. She said he'd come in, ordered a turkey sandwich, paid cash, and left. Derek left the restaurant shaken. He drove around town trying to do something different. He went to a movie theater. The same movie was playing that had been playing the day before. He looked at the show times and they were identical to what they'd been yesterday. Down to the minute. He got back in his car and drove to the warehouse. At 5 p.m., he clocked out and went home. That night, He called his sister and told her something very weird was happening. He said he thought he was losing his mind. His sister was concerned and told him to go to the ER to get checked out. Derek drove to the hospital. But the waiting room was exactly the same as he remembered from a hospital visit months ago. The same people were sitting in the exact same seats. One woman was watching the same video on her phone that she'd been watching last time he was there. Derek walked up to the desk to check in, and the receptionist looked at him and said, "Derek, you were just here yesterday. Are you feeling worse?" Derek hadn't been to that hospital. Not in years. He got back in his car and drove home. He was terrified now. He was convinced he was either going insane or stuck in some kind of time loop. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in his living room waiting for the day to change. At 7 a.m., his alarm went off. Tuesday. The exact same Tuesday for the third time. Derek drove to work and did something different. He told his supervisor he was quitting. Effective immediately, Jeff looked at him like he was insane and said, "Derek, you literally told me yesterday you were quitting, and then you came back today and acted normal. Is this some kind of joke?" Derek hadn't quit. Not yesterday, because yesterday hadn't happened the way Jeff remembered. But when Derek went to the office manager to put in his resignation paperwork, the office manager pulled up a file. She said Derek had already filled out resignation paperwork yesterday. The form was there. His signature was on it. The date was from the previous Tuesday. Derek said at that moment he felt like reality was breaking apart. He wasn't sure if he was living through events the first time, or if he was repeating a day that he'd already lived. And each cycle, the world was adjusting to match what was supposed to have happened. He went home and called his sister again. He told her everything. She wanted him to go to the hospital, but Derek was convinced something supernatural was happening. He wasn't sick. He was trapped. That night, he made a decision. He got his car keys, filled up a gas tank, and drove north. He drove for hours, getting as far away from his hometown as he could. He drove through the night, and when the sun came up, he checked his phone. Wednesday. The day had changed. Derek pulled over and started crying. He'd broken the loop by leaving. After driving all night and getting about 400 miles away from home, the cycle had stopped. Time had moved forward. Derek never went back to his home. He called his sister a week later and told her he was starting a new life somewhere else. He'd gotten a new job, a new apartment under similar conditions to his old life, but in a different state. When his sister asked him what he thought had happened, Derek said he didn't know. But he had a theory. He thought the day he'd experienced wasn't just any Tuesday. He thought it was the day he was supposed to have died. He thought something had given him a chance to live. And by leaving, by breaking the pattern and refusing to repeat that day anymore, he'd stepped out of whatever cycle was supposed to claim him. He moved back to his home state about 5 years later, and he said that day in November has never repeated. But every November he takes the day off work and gets in his car and drives north. He said he wants to remember the day he escaped whatever had trapped him. He wants to keep living forward instead of stuck in that loop. So there you have it. 7 stories from November. 7 accounts of people who experienced something they couldn't explain. Something that challenged their understanding of reality. Whether you believe these stories or not, there's something about November that keeps drawing people into the dark. Maybe it's the cold, the way the days get shorter and the nights get longer. Maybe there's something about this particular month that makes the boundary between our world and something else a little bit thinner. If you've experienced something similar, or if you have a story you'd like to share, let me know in the comments. I read every comment, and maybe your story will be featured in an upcoming video. Thanks for watching. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next one.